Well, that's interesting. Hey, that's a cute sweater. Although I don't think that that's going to work out right now. It's a little too warm. Hey, look, it's that sweater pattern again. Wait, it's a shawl? Can I possibly make the shawl a sweater? It would look good as a sweater. I think I can do that, can't I? What if. Yes. Yes, I can make this into a sweater. Right? Earlier this year, I was scrolling my social media feeds when I saw an ad for a free pattern. I stopped, I looked at the ad for a moment, and I thought that was a beautiful sweater. However, it was the beginning of spring and I continued scrolling. Later that day, I was scrolling again and the same ad popped up. Again, it was the same thought process. It's a sweater, it's going to be hot soon. Maybe towards the beginning of fall and winter, I will attempt to make this sweater. Downloading free patterns to me is sort of akin to buying yarn for the fact that it is just on sale and not because I have a use for it at the time or a projected project for it at the time. So I am trying to work on not cluttering my digital space with a bunch of patterns that I may never use. Something I'm still working on. When the same pattern popped up on my social media feed again the next day, social media ads are nothing if they are not persistent. I decided to take a closer look. This time I realized that this was not a sweater pattern, it was in fact a shawl pattern. This shawl pattern. This meant that it was a bit more useful in my area this time of year. Nights here in the summer tend to be a little bit chilly, and having a shawl to drape over my shoulders to keep my shoulders a little bit warmer is something that I do use quite frequently. But wait, since I did think that this was a sweater at first, is it possible to knit the same shawl as a sweater? The shawl appeared to be knit top down, which is the way I prefer to make my sweaters due to the fact that I absolutely hate hiding tails. The reason I saw the pattern and thought that it was a sweater in the first place was because the first section of the stitches looked quite similar to a circular yoke that I had contemplated being a possibility while I was making the circular yoke to this pattern last year. The yoke for this theoretical sweater could be made swapping the yoke for the T pattern with the beginning section of the shawl. The next question for me to figure out was, do I have enough of the same yarn to use for this project? Sure, I have enough yarn to make just about anything in my stash. I knew I wanted a similar contrast in colors as to what the shawl has in its project picture. I consulted my fiber wall and I chose a large full skein each of Mainstay's acrylic yarn in white, gray, and purple. It was at this point in time that I did download the shawl pattern. In reading it over, it was confirmed that it was constructed top down. There were 5 sections of different stitch patterns. I already knew the top section was the garter stitch, and that there were 2 sections of elongated stitches. The lace pattern and the mesh pattern were the 2 that were questionable to me on how to construct. With that, I had more questions that needed to be answered. The first to pop into my head was, how is my yarn choice going to affect the drape of the projects? The size of the yarn that I was going to use in the sweater portion of this project was inevitably going to be a different yarn than what was suggested in both the shawl and in the T pattern that I was going to be using as a stitch count reference. To me, the next logical step was going to be figuring out the stitch gauge and the needed needle size for the yarn that I was going to be using for the T pattern. In this case, it was a size 4 acrylic yarn. The next question that I had to answer was, how do the stitches interact with each other while they're being knitted? And where are the yarn overs in relation to each other in both the lace and the mesh sections? From working the cat paw lace shawl, I realized the importance of the answer to this question. If adding stitches to each side, you need to account for the skewing of the pattern repeats. This is the difference between having a round cluster of lace work and, well, a mess of holes. A fact that was neglected in the written pattern for the cat paw lace shawl instructions. Since working the sweater portion of this project was going to be taking away those increases, I needed to figure out on my own what those stitch repeats or stitch pattern repeats were. Let's remember, the designer of this shawl was obviously not expecting or intending on someone to ever use this particular pattern as a sweater. In reading over the pattern, I also realized that I had 2 new to me knitting techniques, which to me is amazing. I was attempting to learn or experience 3 new knitting techniques this year, which means that that is 2 more check marks that I get to make. The first of those that I needed to play around with ended up at the very beginning of the shawl because I have never done a German twisted cast on before. So with some waste yarn and some knitting needles, I set about learning how to do this cast on. Now, for me, even though I have not done this particular cast on before, it was quite similar to the longtail cast on that I am very familiar with. So learning this new motion in making this cast on actually was not as hard as I thought it was going to be. Hey, you've made it this far in this video, which means you must be liking what you're seeing. So if you have not yet subscribed to this channel, please consider doing so. Also, liking, sharing, and commenting down below really helps me out, and I really appreciate it. Also, since I have not gotten to the point yet where I can monetize or do anything member wise on this channel, I do have a Ko-fi set up. So if you are interested or so feeling to help support this channel, I am very deeply grateful. So with all that being said, let's get back to the project. So with that, the stitching commenced, and I have a series of update videos that I had taken or filmed while I was working on this project. So I am going to insert those here. The second day I worked on this in the car, and I'm still kind of shy about recording, and my husband kind of started laughing at me, so yeah. You may be hearing fans running in the background, and it is the lighting is kind of junk. We are once again in potentially bad storms today. So anyway, this morning I did wake up early because of the fact that I wanted to finish the last repeat of segment number 2. I finished that. Yarns are all cut. I have not moved my lifeline, that's the word. I have not moved the lifeline yet to the end of the second segment. However, I'm not sure if I'm going to be having any more time today to work on this particular project, saying that today is the bridal expo day, and so I am going to be gone the majority of the day. So I am going to come back hopefully tomorrow. I will be back at working on this. I'm going to start up the purple part. I'm going to choose a royal purple over the pictured pink in that video or in that photo. So I'm going to do purple instead. So it has been quite a few days since I last talked to you guys. I will look to see how long and post it here. Anyway, finished the portion of the knit lace. So I finished the knit lace on this. It is the reason why I had to make the video of this particular knit row marker, because I had to frog this so many times it wasn't even funny. I think I lost count at 3 because I had to work back, and knit lace and I love-hate relationship. Oh well. So anyway, now I am on to another segment of the white elongated stitches, and hopefully that will be a little bit faster than it was for the knit lace, even though it's more stitches per rows, because as this is working up, I'm working even more stitches per row. So I'm gonna get to that. It is a humid, stormy day. As you can tell, it is rather kind of dark in here, and I just hit myself in the face with my circular knitting needle. Oh well. I managed to get done with the second strip of white. That's the extended knit stitches. Anyway, got done with the second strip. Now I just have to move on to the final segment of this shawl, and then the shawl is done. I'm up to 406 stitches per row. When you start off with 7 stitches, I think it was, and you're increasing like 6 stitches every 2 rows, you end up getting quite big quite regularly. So I am up to 406 stitches are on the circular knitting needle right now, which means the circular knitting needle is getting a really good workout. I'm hoping that this one, so far we're doing good. We're almost to the end, and I feel like I need to knock on some wood, hoping that this particular knitting needle continues to hold out. Anyway, I am going to go and work on this last segment, and I will be back. Please do pardon the hair and the poor lighting. It's Wisconsin. Anyway, finished the shawl. This particular shawl, it turned out really well. The only thing is I do wish, construction wise, on this shawl, which is not going to go into the sweater, but however, I am going to talk about it now. Ooh, excuse me. Is the fact that with the way the stitches are done on the edge, it is very stiff and doesn't have much give. I am also at the same time working on this stuff because, you know, multiple whips. I am working on a shawl that uses slip stitches at the ends, and I would definitely recommend that. And if I do make this particular shawl again, I am going to do the slip stitches at each end to give more of like a stretchier edge, because you're not putting any let me see if I can show it to you here. So as you can see, you don't add anything to the edge. So it is very not forgiving. I'll put it that way. It's not very forgiving. Okay, so I got smart. I put you on a stand. The phone is now on a stand. Anyway, and you're probably hearing my fan running in the background. It is still kind of warm outside, and the fan is going to be a necessity. Anyway, so as I was saying before, this doesn't have very much stretch. I will show you what I mean as far as when I talk about the slip stitch edging. So here is another work in progress that I have going on. This is a shawl that starts off, ooh, where did the fluff come from? Anyway, this is a garter, or a shawl that starts out in garter stitch. This is the slip stitch shawl that I was talking about, and how much like extra give and wiggle room I have on this. And if it was even a thing about the garter stitch, this is garter stitch, I believe. Yeah, no, this is garter stitch. This is knit both ways is garter stitch. This is garter stitch. So yeah, so if it was an issue with garter stitch, this would be a little bit stretchier, and it is not. It is very unforgiving. With the shawl finished, I could then start on the sweater. Before I show the progress videos for that, I'll let you in on some of the pattern information and reasoning. I did realize that the needle I used for the shawl was bigger than I had thought that the sweater pattern called for. I also changed yarn brands between the shawl and the sweater. All of the yarns that I used were a size 4. However, I did make the change to a skein each of the Lion brand Pound of Love in white and one in gray. And I also switched out the purple from the Mainstays purple to a skein of the Big Twist Value Pound Plus in purple. So there is a little bit of a shade difference between the purples. However, I think that this was acceptable. That way I knew that I had enough of the same yarn. Because of these changes, I did do a quick swatch test just to make sure that the drape was similar enough to proceed with making the sweater. I took the T pattern and I worked the same sizing as I had made for previous makes of this pattern. I decided to make the entire yoke of this sweater in the garter stitches, which made this section a bit longer than the shawl version. The reasoning for this, it was twofold. Firstly, I wanted to have more of a solid pattern for the bust area, Having the garter stitch section below where the sleeves were going to be separated for meant that the elongated stitches were going to start lower on my chest. Also, I didn't feel at the time that the increases for the yoke would translate well using the elongated stitches. Now I think that it would have been okay, but it was just a little bit of added math that I needed to do, and at that point in time, I didn't have time for that. I ended up changing the rate at which the increase happened. Doing the garter rows instead of the stocking net does compress the row count just a little bit. However, I didn't feel the need to make a huge adjustment. I figured that given the weight of the final project, that it would end up stretching those rows out just a bit anyway. When it came time to separate stitches for the sleeves to continue working on the body, the only concern that I had was casting on stitches under the arms to make a number divisible by the pattern repeats. This was fairly straightforward for this project, saying that the lace pattern was a multiple of 6 and the mesh pattern was a multiple of 2, which means as long as I had a stitch count around the body that was divisible by 6, I was fine. If I wasn't, I was just going to add half of the needed stitches that I need to increase under each of the underarm cast-ons. So say I needed to cast on 2 or have 2 extra stitches for the body, I would add 1 stitch under each arm. Let's just say I had to add 5 stitches to the body stitch count. What I was intending on doing then was adding 2 stitches for each underarm cast on and then adding another stitch, probably in the middle of either the back or the front. The final concern was where the rows of the sweater changed. Since I wasn't turning my work, there was inevitably going to be a line where the transition would be. How I lessened that was by putting those stitches at the back and behind one of my arms. I want to say it was the left. I'm pretty sure it was the left. It was a little more noticeable in the white elongated stitches than in the darker colors. However, to my surprise, it was not nearly as bad as I thought it was going to be or had imagined it to be. I think a seam in that area would have been even more noticeable, honestly. So this is how far I am on this particular yoke. I am doing, I have the seam going on here, which I don't think is horrible because of the fact that we have been conditioned due to Shimu into seeing less par, and I think that this actually just kind of shows the fact that it is handmade. Plus, another thing too is I think once I have this on, you're not going to see that. Like, it kind of disappears in there. Stitch markers are here marking each increase. I did make these increases so then that way they kind of get lost in the sauce, so to speak. I don't want them to be like too tremendously like in your face all the way around this circular yoke. But I think it's coming along quite nicely. I think that this particular pattern does equal out pretty well for this project. So I'm just going to keep on going, and I will meet you back when I get the yoke done. Okay, so I have been hard at work. I wanted to catch this real fast before my day gets kind of crazy, but I did finish the yoke. It took me a couple of times, honestly. And as you can tell, I have stitch markers in each of the rows that I increased on, partially because of the fact that I was losing the increases and losing count of how often I increased. So as you can tell by this, I used the Yarnspirations sweater pattern or tee pattern. I'll have it linked below. Anyway, I used that as the basis basically for this circular yoke. I did change up. For my size, I was supposed to increase every 6 rows. Due to the fact that that was just a stocking net, basic stocking net stitch, I decided that this I could go 7 rows between, which means then that every other white row was where I was doing the increases, and I was doing that on the first row of the white instead of the second, just so that way I thought it looked a bit better and it was hidden a little bit better given the fact that I had the purl rows. So I only increased on knit rows because I was working in the round. I did the math and I did realize that this, for my size, it is already out to 6, multiple of 6 stitches, which is what I need for the lace part of the pattern. So I just now have to figure out, because I was thinking about it, and let me show you this. For pattern's sake, I am probably going to be doing this. However, I think for any of the following sweaters I may make like this, I might change it up a little bit. So hold on 2 seconds. Okay, here I have the shawl. So what I have noticed is on this top part, it's kind of hard to show because I'm also holding my phone, but on the top part, as you can tell, I'm going to put arrows here. There was no like setup rows between the elongated stitches and that striped garter stitch. Yeah, the striped garter stitch. So I don't know how well I like that. However, farther down the sweater or the shawl, there is for the second part of the elongated stitches. So I'm debating on whether I want, here, let me get me back into focus here. There, back in the camera, that's good. So I'm trying to figure out if I want to do it exactly the same way as the pattern for the shawl, or if I do just want to add in. Now that I'm looking at it, I think it looks better with the setup rows. So I think I'm going to do that before I get into the elongated stitches, just so in that way it looks a little bit better. And I think also to make it more cohesive, I guess. I'm not sure why that was. Maybe I made a mistake. I did read through, get back in the camera, Barbie. I did read through the pattern again, and I did have it correct. Really, I can't. So I think for the sweater, now that I think about it, I think for the sweater, I am just going to jump in and do those extra setup stitches for the elongated stitches for the sweater. Another thing that I did realize also was the fact that with the shawl, I made the shawl in using a size 8 knitting needle, thinking that that's what I did for the sweater pattern. I thought I was doing things correctly, and it turns out I did not. So the sweater is actually calls for a size 6 needle, which I didn't realize until after I was done with the yoke. Well, not done, but after I had gotten probably far done on the yoke. So I did switch back over to the 6 for sizing sake. I did do kind of a test swatch using the size 6 for the sweater, or for the pattern, to see what it would do with the yarn. I did like it, so therefore I continued on with size 6. So I am going to get back to the sweater, and yeah, so far, and if it made it through the yoke, I think saying that it made it through the yoke, okay, I'm thinking that it should be good for the rest of the sweater. So fingers crossed. Okay, so when it comes to the sweater portion of this project, I am done with the elongated stitches. I did end up adding in those setup rows, is what I would put them, the setup rows for the elongated stitch, so then that way we have the garter stitch on both sides in white. I did do 2 polls. One was on YouTube posts, and another one was on Threads. I got kind of some crickets when it comes to those 2 polls, but putting together, the poll was on what color of yarn that I want to do the colored portion of this particular sweater in. The options were purple, teal, and pink. Of those 3 comments, purple won out, or 3 votes, purple won out. So I am going to be procuring my purple yarn from my stash here in a little while, and it is on to the zigzag eyelets, zigzag lace that is next for this. So yeah, I will be getting to that, and I will meet you back here when the purple part is done. This update is brought to you during a time of Canadian wildfires. So we are being affected by the smoke and such. So it is a cloudy, gloomy day. I'm assuming it's because of smoke. Anyway, I do have a project update for you. I have finished the lace portion, the zigzag lace portion to the sweater. I have tried it on. I am hoping that with blocking things fit a little bit better and have a little bit better drape than they do. It seems rather oversized still, so I'm hoping that it works out, and if it doesn't, well, I guess I'm making another one of these sweaters. I am very happy with how it is turning out, and I'm very happy with the way that my seam looks. You can tell the knitting eye here. Let me see if I can fix this. Hold on. All right, holding the sweater like this, you can sort of tell where the seam is, and I will highlight, hopefully, I will attempt to highlight where exactly the seam is. Editing Barbie here, saying that I did not stay still long enough to highlight that particular seam. I decided to thus do this instead, so you can see where that seam is if you're having an issue seeing it. I don't think for the untrained knitting eye, people will be able to see it very easily. If they do, then they probably are or related to some sort of knitter who has taught them a few things or such. However, maybe they might be able to see it. I don't know. I am happy with the way that the seam is turning out and looking. So I guess that's kind of the main point of that. Like I said, I might have to make another version of this. I am also kind of toying around with the notion of making it into a cardigan. So if that is something that you would like to see, comment that below. Hopefully I won't stab myself in the neck with a knitting needle. However, like I said, if you would like to see me make this into a cardigan eventually, put that comment cardigan in the comments below, and I'll show you how I work that up. So, yeah, to the next stage. Well, that is all of the information and videos that I have so far for this video. So now I guess it's the reveal. Okay, so I'm going to hold my mic just for the fact that I don't feel very comfortable with clipping it to this sweater. However, yay. Also, thank you for not ending up in my comments reminding me that this is may not technically be finished. However, because neither one of these two, either the shawl or my sweater, currently have the tails hid. But I wanted to get this video out kind of as early as possible. Second, this is before blocking it, so it might still kind of sit funny. However, I do realize that Mama has lost some weight. So I made this sweater using the same stitch pattern, same what am I looking for? I made this particular pattern using the same stitch gauge as the T pattern. However, I made the pattern as to what I made it back a year, maybe even 2 years ago. I knew that I had lost some weight, and I made the mistake of not doing a better body measurement before I started stitching this, and just kind of, oh, it can totally be the same size as I knitted myself. Yes, so it is a little bit on the baggy side. I will totally admit the fact that I do have another one started on the needles as we speak to make the smaller size, like the size down. So, yes, I also have not yet done the weighing of this to see how many grams of yarn I used. I have been noticing that my monthly wrap ups are not getting great views. So I am going to start putting the usage of yarn at the end of each project. So this is the amount of yarn, and you're going to have voiceover Barbie here telling you. For the sweater, I used 160 grams of gray, 226 grams of white, and 132 grams of purple. This brings me to the total yarn usage for the sweater to 518 grams. I would also like to take this time quick to note the fact that this is just the yarn usage for the sweater part of this project. The shawl total was part of the July wrap up, and that is listed under the mystery project. Thank you, editing Barbie. Anyway, so I do believe that this theory worked out well. I will probably end up wearing the sweater just for the fact, even though it is oversized, I do kind of like my clothes kind of baggy and comfy, and that this is. So I am happy with this project. Like I said, it would have probably been a little bit nicer if it was just a little smaller, which I am working on. So eventually you will probably see that. I am also considering making this into a cardigan. So if you were interested in seeing that, comment below. And since you made it to the end of this video, if you have not yet subscribed, please consider doing so. Also, liking, sharing, and I believe at the end of this video, the comment will be sweater if you are not interested in seeing the cardigan make. However, until next time, bye! I feel like I'm looking down at my screen way too much. In say I needed to add an odd number of stitches to the body count. Body count. That's like freaking sounds horrible. That sounds like I would get like demonetized if I was monetized. Anyway.